Hi everyone. So my name is Alex. I'm actually Canadian, but I've been living in France for 15 years now. And I actually created Oskare Capital, which is a French investment manager, which is launching Oskare Fund 1. And our focus is really on cannabinoids and the endocannabinoid system. And I can just give you a quick background on who I am. So I'm an engineer by training. Moved to France in 2006, met a French wife, and next thing you know, you've been in France for 15 years. I've been a venture capitalist for 11 years, going on 12. And I was a partner in a fund in Paris for several years, managed a corporate venture fund for a chemical company called Solvay Group. And then in 2018, I discovered the endocannabinoid system a bit by accident. So my son, being Canadian, obviously you follow what's happening in Canada and you buy canopy growth stocks and stuff like that and make money on the stock market. But I wasn't really that well versed in the sector until my son, 5, so my son's called James. I have 2 boys, and James has a rare genetic disorder. And in that disorder, there's autism spectrum disorder, epilepsy, and ADHD. And there's very little known on his disorder. It's called Potocki-Lupski syndrome. And a lot of parents out of the US were actually substituting pharmaceutical ingredients with CBD, notably Charlotte's Web and Epidiolex. So I was starting to look into it because of my son, who was having seizures. And I asked a neurologist a very simple question, which basically led me on this journey. Should I be giving my kid CBD for his epilepsy? So that's kind of the background on how I got into the space. So what are we trying to do? Just a brief background on what we're trying to do. So we're the first regulated fund in Europe. So we're trying to raise 150 million euros. We're hoping to have a first close by the summer. It is the summer, but hopefully by August for a first 30 million. And what we're really focusing on is endocannabinoid related treatments. So that's synthetic molecules as well as plant-based molecules, and building out the ecosystem in Europe, which is quite nascent with technologies. Europe is very tech heavy right now in the sector. At least that's what we're seeing. And there's a lot of interesting companies that we're looking at that are really going to, I think, disrupt the market, not only here in Europe, but globally. And one thing that we don't do is we don't do production and we don't do rec. So just quickly on the team, we're really focusing on science. So our chairman is Bruce Linton, the founder of Canopy. And we have a whole team today, and nobody's paid. Everybody really believes very hard in this sector. And we have a mix between we have 3 medical doctors, 1 IP lawyer, 2 venture capitalists, an expert in the endocannabinoid system, people in Switzerland and Israel. So we're quite a big team, but we've had a lot of time to do our homework. And this is what I'm going to show you today is, in part, what we've done in terms of homework and how we see France playing a role. So everybody knows about the endocannabinoid system here, I assume? Yes? One thing you guys might not know is that synthetic compounds are currently being developed very heavily in order to target this system. So they have nothing to do with cannabinoids in some cases. In some cases, they're what we call cannabinoid analogs. So you functionalize CBD and you add different chemical groups and make it a new molecule that is more kind of pharma-focused. And there's obviously in these synthetic compounds also some potential in the wellness market. So we're looking really at how do we create a new class of therapeutics that can help patients, that have cancer, patients with, autism, pain, all kinds of treatments today that aren't very well met by the pharma industry. So why Europe? In the US, a year ago, people were like, Europe, it's going nowhere. Recently, I think they've woken up with, Cureleaf making a move, with EMAC, and also the GW acquisition by Jazz. A lot of the US players are really looking at Europe. And why is that? First of all, government regulations. Everybody's saying it's taking forever to get these programs going, but actually medical cannabis in a lot of countries has been legal for years. So that enables government grants to be unlocked to fund research. So there's a lot of research institutes, and we've mapped them all out in Europe. There's 30 of them today that are currently working on endocannabinoid related treatments, on the plant, extraction, all kinds of things. So that's really very interesting because In the US, it's federally illegal, so all the great big universities like, Stanford, MIT, Caltech, they cannot get grants. And the researchers do not want work on something that is federally illegal. So Europe actually has a lead in terms of R&D. Thirdly, is Europe, I think, will become the biggest market. I'm convinced of this, that Europeans and the regulators in Europe will want, medication that has been through some kind of regulatory process that treats something better than existing pharmaceutical APIs or can provide new treatments and obviously are reimbursed. So it's much different than the US model, which is kind of like a Trojan horse for rec, really. You go to your, I don't know if you guys have been to a dispensary in the US, but you have your toe hurts, you go into the dispensary, you tell the doctor, my toe hurts, and you walk out with a bag of weed. In Europe, it's not going to be like that, right? You're going to go to your doctor, you're going to say, I have this problem, is it reimbursed? Yes, okay, fine. And you really have to have proof, right? There's going to go through a reimbursement route in a lot of cases. And this is where the next wave is coming. So we've had the first wave, production. We can say retail and recreational is still going, but we think the next wave really is medical, and it'll happen. It's happening now, and I think the real champions will come out in 3 to 4 years. And when you look at a place like the UK, we can still say that they're in Europe, there's 1.4 million patients that are eligible for cannabis cards in the UK. I don't know if you guys follow what's happening in the UK, but it's absolutely crazy what's happening in the UK right now. So, and I think also CBD being descheduled also really helped. The Canna Vape case also really helped. So I think in Europe, we're set to take the lead on the pharmaceutical medical standpoint, I think, globally. Don't forget, European technologies can be exported globally, such as GW. This is what we've seen. So this is a very interesting slide. So sorry, I didn't change some of the wording there. It's a promotional material that we use. But what we're seeing here is we're seeing a massive uptake in patents. And that is usually a very, very good sign that things are going to happen in terms of developing new drugs, developing new technologies. And when you see these kind of spikes, that means that there will be an exit. There will be companies that will be bought out. There will be companies that get drugs to the market. There will be companies that will be IPO. Our job, we're a fund, so our job is obviously to develop the ecosystem, but our job is also to make money for our investors. So, and what you can see here on the bottom chart is you're seeing a lot of big pharma discreetly doing IP. Very, very interesting. They're going to play. They're waiting to play. But they will. And I think the GW acquisition was a big wake-up call for them. None of them are investing in our fund, but I can tell you they would love to get a hand on some of the work that we've done. This is what we've done as well. So we've actually, during the first 9 months of COVID, we spent a lot of time looking at papers, looking at all the different papers, and basically coming up with these two charts, right? So we have PubMed here, where we're looking at the different treatments and we've broken them down. When you see such a high uptick in patents and publications, that means that something is happening. And that is happening in part in North America, but in large part in Europe. And when you look at the different groups, right, our fund is focusing on pain, oncology, depression, and there's autism. That's a subject that's close to my heart, but there's potentially a lot of interesting applications in autism, heart disease, and obviously everybody's talking about COVID-related issues in terms of inflammation and the kinetic storm that happens in the body. Apparently CBD can potentially treat that. So we're looking at a very dynamic market, and a lot of players will come out of Europe in the next few years. So as I mentioned before, so drivers for Europe, we've got regulation, we've got science. So a lot of, Europe is a hotbed for pharma and agriculture. And obviously, people want European products because in North America, we think, German engineering, Swiss chocolate, French wine, Pharmaceutical products are a bit the same. Also, when we're looking at companies right now in Europe, the valuations are pretty low. So there's a lot of companies raising money and not too many people with capital. And US investors are starting to come over. But I think there's a lot of interesting value as well, and it's unfortunate there's not enough people out there to back some of these companies. But hopefully we'll be there in the next few months to be able to do so. And then that's the issues, right? And what we're seeing too is a lot of teams that are need help to get better. So when we look at some investments in clean tech or in other areas with professional teams, in some cases, the teams need to be professionalized a bit, but that's not a deal breaker. There's lots of people, I think, that you can bring on from the pharma sector, from the entrepreneurs that are getting into the space. So I think it'll be very interesting in the next few years. And the market's going to grow. Like, there's no other market with a CAGR of 30, 40%, right? In Europe, it's going to be huge. And this is what's really interesting, is over the last year, right? So we've talked about patents. We've talked about publication, favorable regulations for research in Europe. And this is what's really, really interesting. So we have, obviously, corporates started to put a toe in the door. So we have J&J, Lonza, Tilray, Novartis. But really, it's at the beginning of this year where things really heated up, right? So we had Jazz being acquired. Jazz acquired GW, which sent shockwaves in the US industry because it was the biggest M&A ever in the sector. A real M&A, It's not like people sharing swaps. It's people swapping shares. It's people actually paying up and buying something. I think they probably paid a bit too high for GW, but it sent shockwaves. Obviously, Biden, the European advantage today in terms of R&D might shrink, because if Biden legalizes medical cannabis federally, that means that that's going to open up grants for the public institutions. Private institutions can do it, but really when you open up the public institutions, it's going to be a shockwave. In the UK also, what's interesting is you can start quoting cannabis companies on the London Stock Exchange. We've got a couple also in the Scandinavian countries. Hopefully we'll see a French one soon. That would be nice to see one on the French market. And just recently, first move by a US MSO in Europe, Curaleaf bought EMAC. So, and then the last one, which I don't know if you guys are aware of, but DSM. Do you guys know DSM? They're a very conservative Dutch company, invested in Brains Bioceutical in Vancouver. This is the first move by a well-established CVC, corporate venture capital fund, doing in the space. And I had a lot of my friends from the corporate venture space in Europe saying, oh my God, this is crazy. We should look at this. So I think we're really at the beginning of a very nice story here in Europe. Research, companies, as well as Americans looking at us and saying, something's happening here. I want to play the game. So I just want to talk about my home country just for a quick second. I see Canada really as a case study for Europe. When we look at, Canada, I remember when I was still there, they had legalized it, federally for medical. Nothing really happened until about 2016. That's when it took off. I think we're probably today 5 years, 6 years behind Canada. But look at the uptick. It's quite big. And when we look at Germany, right, there's a lot of patients now having access to this in Germany. So I think, Canada is very similar to Europe. We have socialized medicine in Canada. We have a pretty open-minded population. So I think, everybody in this room believes that Europe has a lot of potential. And when we compare it to Canada, I think we might be onto something in Europe. And Canada also, in terms of rec, they were the first ones to do rec. So maybe we'll see a rec market in Europe in a few years as well, which I think, could only help. But now I want to talk about France. So I don't know if you guys know Gainsbourg. Do you guys know Gainsbourg? Yeah. So this first slide is Je t'aime moi non plus, right? It's a very famous song. So France, as you know, I think we've talked a lot about France yesterday and today, but France has 67 million people. It's a very medicated population. A lot of people take antidepressants and antipsychosis medicine and stuff like that. Highest per capita use of psychotropes in Europe. And also, I don't know where they get this number, but I certainly believe it walking around in Paris. There's a lot of people that smoke cannabis in France and hide it, right? And this is what's funny. So you've got a population, right, that is stressed, is anxious, smokes a lot of cannabis, but on the other hand, you have a government, right, who is very hostile to the sector. And it's funny because 2-3 years ago, they were not. I don't know what happened. Maybe they had a bad trip or something early on. But basically, at the beginning, we thought that Macron was going to depenalize, he was going to open up the medical sector, and actually, he's done quite the opposite. We've had Philippe over here had to sue the government, literally sue them. Like, it's crazy. And And then obviously now there's a big war against selling flower in CBD shops. So recently I think there was a CBD shop, was it in the south of France? Was it Dijon or something? Yeah, sorry, yeah, that basically the government. Yeah, so the government forced them to stop, and the judges blocked it, but it's just constant. So we're entering in France an Nixonian age of the war on drugs, which is absolutely insane, and they blame the dealers for all their problems, which I don't think really is the case, but it's a good settlement. It's a good argument for legalization, and they're really going against the popular sentiment. This is what I don't understand: is this government? There was a kind of consultation recently from the government on legalizing cannabis. You had over 250,000 people responded, and 80% said they were in favor of legalization. So I really don't understand this kind of dichotomy. Je t'aime, I love you, but I don't really. So it's quite strange. And then we look at the current trial, I guess you want to call it, in France. So I say one step forward, two steps back. So unfortunately, I wish that the French would have been a bit more ambitious. Today we only have a 3,000 person trial on 3 specific indications. So MS, which we know that works, pain should work, and epilepsy in certain cases works. And 4 specific formulations, and they want to generate French data, which I think is important to compare with external data. But the problem is it's 2 years old. That's 2 years delay, so there's a 2-year delay in the experimentation. And the guys who supply the cannabis have to supply it for free. So I mean, you're limiting the amount of potential suppliers, the potential formulations. It's really, unfortunately, it could be more ambitious. And the neighbors are taking the lead. The UK, we've got Germany, we've got Switzerland, we've got Denmark. When we look at those ecosystems from an investor standpoint and from an R&D standpoint, they're very, very strong. And there's a lot of industry associations who have formed recently to try to really lobby the government. And there's a lot of people that are pissed off, including myself. I think a lot of people are pissed off that this thing is not going as fast as it should. And obviously, they're looking for standard products, which I think is very good, with specific THC, CBD ratios, and hopefully moving up the value chain. But we're quite late to the game. But what's interesting about the French, and this is something that I've learned in France, is they often wait and see what people do. And then when they put their mind to it, they can be very good at catching up. Just like vaccination, right? We were dead last like 6 months ago, and now we're crushing it. So I think France is a sleeping giant. In terms of France is the biggest exporter of hemp in Europe. And they have good quality hemp, and they can't even use the flower today. And they also have a large agricultural and pharma sector. France is one of the breadbaskets of Europe, right? So they have a very good kind of industrial complex in that sector. And there's a lot of research happening. What you guys might not know, but in France, there's a lot of people working on the endocannabinoid system right now in France, particularly at INSERM. I don't know if you guys know INSERM, but it's like the equivalent of the National Institute of Health. We actually have in our team an operating partner, a guy called Zsolt Lenke, who should probably come to your conference next year. He is the global expert, one of the global experts on the system. He's been injecting CBD, THC, and all kinds of cannabinoids in monkeys and even humans, and seeing what happens. And he's based out of INSERM, and he actually has a model on how the brain interacts with cannabinoids. And he can drill down to the cellular level and tell you how the system works. So also what's interesting in France is we have some players here that are involved in Canapol, which is kind of an agricultural R&D center in the Nouvelle-Aquitaine region. And they're developing some agri-tech innovation as well as some clinical innovations there. And we're trying to set up a similar project kind of after them, focused on downstream applications. But I think in some parts of France, there's people that are really fighting hard to try to get this industry up and running. And the other thing too, as I mentioned before, strong industrial and R&D base. So we have, CNRS, CEA, INSERM, and we have a lot of corporates like Sanofi. Sanofi used to know the endocannabinoid system because they actually came out with a drug called Rimonabant in the early 2000s, which they really had bad chemistry, and they had to pull it from the market. But They did have it was an anti-obesity drug, and you took it, you lost weight, but you also killed yourself, so it didn't work. The chemistry wasn't right, but now we're seeing second, third generation molecules. One company I particularly like is Ailis Pharma out of Bordeaux. They've modified a steroid, and they can stop THC uptake, so people who are addicted to cannabis, it's a treatment. So some people say cannabis is an addictive, other people don't. The jury's out on that one, but they have another drug which can help improve cognitive function in people with Down syndrome, as well as dementia patients, and they've just signed a big licensing agreement for their first molecule, and this is a spin-off of a French research institute. So they know the endocannabinoid system well. So France, if we wake up, get our stuff together, I think we could potentially be a powerhouse in the sector, not only in Europe, but globally. So that's it. Hopefully, do you have any questions or anything?